Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar on maximising your move to the Microsoft Cloud. We're going to be talking about the challenges that organisations may face and how we aid in solving these pain points, and also how we make the process and subsequent adoption much more streamlined. Our CEO, Peter Baddeley, will be taking you through these aspects, and if anybody has any questions, please feel free to use the chat function and we'll answer these as we go. There will also be a bit of a Q&A session towards the end. There will also be a recording of this session available to all attendees once finished. So take it away, Peter.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalie, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Today's topic is all about sort of maximizing your move to the Microsoft Cloud. We still talk to many organizations who are at different points in their journey to the cloud. And I think the Microsoft Cloud can be quite a daunting prospect when you move from largely just having email and perhaps SharePoint and a few other apps on premises up to the Microsoft Cloud, where there's now a growing number of apps available, whether that's for Teams in the Power Platform, SharePoint, of course, as well as new things like Microsoft Lists and Viva as well. And I think for many organizations, there's a number of challenges. How they go about replacing on-premises solutions, how they support user adoption and drive user adoption, because I think user adoption is very key to the whole model of the way the Microsoft Cloud is designed. But then hand in hand with that is how do they maintain control? When are you moving from a sort of on-premises solution where everything is very much tightly controlled, typically by an IT team, and then you're moving to a platform where it's a very user-centric platform. How do you empower that user adoption without losing key elements of control? And I think it's worth saying that it's not a one-size-fits-all. People are at different points in their journey to the cloud. Some might not have started, so some of you may be in the very early stages of your move to the cloud and you're just planning it out. Others might be using things like chat, meetings within Teams, maybe driven by the pandemic and the necessary need to work remotely. I haven't yet fully rolled out the collaboration aspects of Teams. You might still have got large file stores in SharePoint and network drives, even if you're fully using Office 365 for Teams collaboration and collaboration in sites and groups. You may still have a lot of those legacy document stores which you haven't yet migrated. Or you may well have rolled out SharePoint in Teams, but you're getting a bit overwhelmed. Actually, there's too many teams. People are struggling with search and discoverability. You're not quite sure who has access to what content. Or maybe it's a mixture of several of these. It's not as simple as putting yourself in one of these options. So I think let's look at a few of those areas, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Firstly, preparing around migration. We're not a migration product ourselves. We don't deal with specifically file migration. But I think there's another element to migration which is often missed. And this might be whether you're moving to the cloud, first of all, or it might be that you're now actually looking to tackle some of those legacy file shares you've got on premises. In the cloud, SharePoint's fundamentally structured differently. We've not got subsites anymore. Well, technically, we've still got subsites, but they're very much discouraged by Microsoft. We're now encouraged to use group connected sites with a whole new sort of security model attached to it, and then leverage hub sites to create that structure. So moving away from a hierarchical structure to a much more flat structure fundamentally challenges maybe how we've been structuring data for quite a while. And we have a number of other collaboration workloads to consider, like Teams, like Planner, like Yammer. How do we prepare an appropriate structure for us to do any data migration into? It might not be as simple as a one-to-one mapping. We want to put in place the right foundation, the right structure, right consistent structure in order to do our migration into. Secondly is adoption. I think for Office 365 to work well for organizations, you have to consider user adoption. and accept the fact that you can't put total control over users in the same way you may or may not have done in on-premises solutions. Microsoft Teams is a good example of that. It's very much designed with end users in mind. It's supposed to be driven by the users. They're the ones who know when they need to create a new team. They're the ones who know who needs to have access to that team. They're the ones who understand things like what apps and other features need to be included in their team. Office 365 by its nature is designed with user empowerment in mind. That's how it works. It's how you get buy-in. If you talk to people about maybe in the past how they've used things like SharePoint, they found it very frustrating because they were very much reliant on IT or the business to set stuff up for them, and it wasn't necessarily what they want. Teams is designed to engage those users from the start. It's designed to be easy to collaborate with other people, including people outside of your organization. That's intentional because that's the sort of collaboration people want, but also from a business perspective, it makes sense. You want people collaborating with external people in a secure way where the data is still held by you. It's in your tenant and it's not stored in another application, another country with data residency concerns as well. But there is still an important management challenge, and with that increased level of user adoption and also considerations around migration, you need to ensure that consistency is maintained. By making sure things are consistent, it's much easier for users to switch between different sites, teams, projects they're working on, collaborations, whatever it might be. You want to mitigate security risks where appropriate. So you want to encourage that collaboration. Perhaps you want to encourage that collaboration with external parties, but it has to be done in the right way. You don't want sensitive, confidential, financial, personal information being shared with the wrong people. That might be internally. There might be sensitive HR information which you don't want shared with other people in the organization. That might be sensitive business information which you don't want shared with external parties. It's important to archive content at the right time for several reasons. Firstly, around things like data retention, but also in terms of making it easier for users to use these experiences. If you log into Teams, there's only so much real estate available. There's only so much space available on that left-hand navigation. If I've got 20, 30, 40, 50 teams, which I see listed there, it's quite hard for me to navigate around. It's quite hard for me to make sure that I put my information in the right place. And ultimately, we want to reduce the overhead on our IT team. These are expensive resources which are much better investing their time in the complicated things around Azure and securing your overall tenant and ultimately supporting those end users with their specific personal challenges. If they're having to service very sort of basic requests around creating teams or creating reports on who has access to things, that's using up their time and ultimately their resources. So that takes us on to Provision Point 365. And Provision Point 365 is a suite of products which encompass two key areas. Firstly, our Workspaces product. So that's for workspace governance around teams, sites, groups, Yammer communities, allowing you to quickly and easily create those workspaces. And then we have our Permissions app, which supplements our Workspaces app and allows you to run reports on who has access to specific files in SharePoint and in Teams, whether that's internally or also external guest users as well. And I'm going to look at several topics today along our theme of maximizing your move to the Microsoft Cloud. Firstly, I'm going to talk a little bit about structure in SharePoint, a little bit in Teams as well, but mainly focused around SharePoint. I'll look at how we can create structure, and I'll also talk about how we can then create that structure on bulk, so how we could create hundreds or even thousands of sites and teams to allow for easy migration. I'll have a look at how we can ensure information is correctly secured. I'll talk about how we can drive adoption with empowering our users, but in a way which still allows us to have some appropriate controls around how information is secured. And we'll touch on some of that ongoing management to automate some of those processes and reduce the burden on IT, but also give the tools which things like compliance and security teams need to have access to. Okay, so let's move into a demo. And we'll start off by having a little look at the bulk creation. So Provision Point Workspaces is all about creating templates and configuring templates to create sites, create teams. And these templates can be configured within your instance of the app. And they can include various features. Firstly, you define what it is which is being created. So a site, a group, team, planner, a Yammer community. And then you can define what gets created. So that might be the document libraries, it might be the channels, it might be content types, folders, apps. And these are all attached to this template. And when I come and request a specific template to be created, either as create a site from a template, either as an administrator or as an end user, I can ensure that certain information is captured about that site, which supports things like the naming and the configuration of that site. So let's say we want to create a new site for one of our customers. We can give that site a name. We can define things like security and privacy, and I'll come and look at that a little bit more when we're talking about self-service. We can then also capture key organizational metadata, and this helps us define things like how that site is going to be created, and also can be used for reporting purposes as well. Now, this is going to go off and create my site. And what I want to talk about is the fact that I've just shown you how to create one site, and that's pretty easy. And you'll say, well, actually, we can just do that directly in SharePoint. But I'm going to dive in and show you what this is actually creating, and then you'll understand some of the power behind it. But I also want to mention the fact that you can create hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of sites, even if you wanted to, using our API. And our API then supports using things like Power Automate, PowerShell, or even your own custom coding. Maybe you've got a business application, a finance system, a project management system, a CRM system, which you want to drive that creation. And so you want to then say, actually, we're doing a migration. We've got 500 customer sites, 1,000 project sites, 50 department sites, which we want to create in SharePoint, in Teams even, with a consistent setup, a consistent structure, and we'd like them all created so that we can then do our migration from our on-premises SharePoint locations, from our network drives in terms of creation. Let's look at a couple of the examples of what we can do. So in terms of a structure, and bear in mind I can do this on bulk, is I can say consistently I would like this type of SharePoint site created, and here are the details of all the sites I would like to be created. We can do things like connect it to a hub site. So this one's connected to a global sales hub site. We can implement that that standard navigation. We can apply our look and feel. So in this case, I've got this dark blue theme applied to all of my sites. We can customize the homepage of that site with web parts. Maybe we're pulling through key information which is specified in the request to provision point. We can include multiple document libraries. So here, for instance, I've got a document library with multiple folders inside of it. We can configure things like default columns. I've got a column here for project code, as well as content types as well. You can configure additional document libraries. I've got one here for email. You can configure and create as many as you want. And that can be different for different templates. So if you wanted to drive different scenarios as part of planning out a migration of content, very easy to do. And all of these sites which are created will leverage some of the other features which I'll show you later on as well for ongoing management. So it's putting in place the right foundations from the start. Exactly the same principle with Microsoft Teams as well. So if I open up Teams here and I go and find a team which has been created using the Provision Point Workspaces app. On top of everything I've shown you in SharePoint, in a team, we can define things like multiple channels. They can be private channels, like this finance channel here. Inside the team, we can also configure various apps. One of those is Planner. So often people leverage apps like Planner for project management, and we can also pre-create a structure of Planner tasks. We can allocate them to specific users or even dynamic users in the request. So if you say the project manager for this project is this user, we can allocate those tasks on that basis. Again, we can do things like file structure with folders, even default files. So if you've got default files which you want to be provisioned into each site and team, you can do that as well. You get complete control over the apps which get created. So you'll notice here I'm not using the Wiki app, and instead I'm using the OneNote app. Some people prefer to use Whiteboard and include that in specific channels as well. So that's how we can, excuse me, we can pre-create a structure of sites and teams ready for a migration, or even as a result of some other activity which is going on to sort of bulk create sites and teams. But we're not just about that initial creation. We're also about empowering user self-service, but with an element of trust. So with some elements of ongoing management, but also making it easier for users to make some decisions as well. Let's look at that briefly. So I've switched users here, and I switched over to a user called Adele. Now, Adele is actually going to use our Teams app. So we can add this app directly in Teams. And if she wants to request a new team, she can do that directly within the app. We make a series of templates available to her. Again, these templates are configurable, and they are controlled and authorized by Active Directory security. So if you only want certain users to request a certain type of team, again, we can do that sort of elements. With each template, we define, again, various settings, organizational metadata, as well as those security settings which I've defined. So here's a great example of how you can simplify user self-service with introducing some controls. So in this scenario, if we want to request a team which is shared with external parties, we use this template, and we can see here that guest access is enabled and external sharing for files is also enabled. If I want to select a different template, then and use it just for internal purposes, then I can do that as well. And you'll notice here that I've got a sensitivity label defining that it's internal. Again, it's guest access in this case is disabled, and sharing is turned off as well. So I'm making the choices simpler for the user, but supporting that with controls. And I might have different authorization processes attached to a team which is externally shared versus a team which is internally shared. Let's just go ahead and request this new team. And we can do other things. So we can do things like say, well, actually, I want to ensure that I have at least 2 owners for my team. Helps with good governance, helps with good management of those teams, ensuring that continuity of ownership. If one of those owners leaves, I've still got that owner who can manage that team and ultimately make the decision about who else should be coming in to manage that team. We can also do things like policy acceptance, guideline acceptance. So we see that a lot where maybe you need someone to accept organizational terms, accept that they've completed things like training before they go ahead and create a new team. I'm going to accept that, and then I'm going to go ahead and request my team. And this will take us to the next stage of how we can implement simple processes to control the management around teams. We're still empowering a user to do that request, but we're introducing an approval step. Just switching over to our other user today, Megan, who is actually one of the approvers. And we'll see that Megan receives an approval task. That's entirely customizable. So if you want to have your own headers, footers, body text, you can configure and customize those approval emails. Actually, any of the notifications. So once a team's been created, as well as some of the ongoing management related emails, which I'm going to show you. The approval is managed within the Provision Point Workspaces app, so it's native to the app. You can leverage other workflow tools like Power Automate if you want to, but it's not required. You don't have to make IT approvers. You might want the IT team or a help desk team to be the approvers, but equally you might want a security team or another group of users to be the approver. You can also manage that approval dynamically. So for instance, you can send the approval to the manager of the user, or based on the organizational metadata. So in this case, I've selected a department of sales, and you can configure in the app that the approver will be dynamic based on that department selected. Again, that's all configurable and can use the metadata which you define. I'm going to approve that request, and now it's going to go ahead and create my team. And I could have multiple additional approval steps, and also my approval step can be different for different teams. While that's going ahead and creating my team, I just wanted to touch on a few other things which this is doing. You'll see here that it's starting to apply a naming convention. So you can apply naming conventions using any of the properties from the request. So in this case, it's taking that property of Department of Sales, and then it's taking a couple of letters and saying, in this case, we'll use the prefix of SL. So really useful for organizational considerations to set a consistent name, but it might also help users. We see customers do things like put EXT or some other value on the end of a team name to identify teams which are external. You'll also see against my team that I've configured something called a lease. So a lease is my life cycle policy. That's going to control the expiry of the site or team. At the end of that lease, we can define what's happening. So it might be that the team will be archived. It might be that it's deleted. It might be that someone is notified to take specific action. And we can allow our owners to manage that lease using our actions. One of those actions is the ability to change the lease, so come in and extend that lease for a longer period of time. So owners will be notified that my lease is coming up based on settings which we configure, and they'll be able to come in and extend that lease for a longer period of time. Useful in starting to introduce some of those management and controls to ensure that actually users won't get overloaded. You can't rely on users to tidy up things themselves, so it's very easy to introduce those controls with things like the lease. What other controls and what other capabilities can we make available to our owners or our administrators within the app? Firstly, we have our permissions app, which I talked about. So the permissions app is available for both SharePoint and for Teams as a Teams app. And it allows us to run quick reports on who has access to a certain site or team. And we can do that very quickly. We can see that the app is available in context to authorized users in a specific site or team. And that comes in a couple of forms. So that might be administrators, or you might authorize certain trusted site owners to use the app as well. They can quickly come in and run what's called a Discover Permissions report to see who has access to a specific site. And they can filter any of those reports to say, show me just the data for a specific user. And they can export that data as well. There's a range of other reports which can be run, and those reports can be run across multiple sites at once. You can come down in context, I'm an administrator here, and run those reports across multiple sites at once. You can also do advanced permissions reports, including things like unique lists, unique items within my site, to give me a greater picture of who has access to different objects and where those permissions are broken down. We have other actions available, such as copy, transfer, grant, delete permissions as well. It's very quick and easy permissions actions, which again can be performed across multiple sites. Finally, there's also a range of reports available for external content as well. So within this site, I happen to know that there's some guest users and also some files which are shared externally. And we can access those reports within the app, and we can run reports on sharing links. So I can see that certain links were shared by Adele in this case, and who they were shared with, whether that's specific individuals, which I can hover over and see their card, or by anonymous links. We can also run reports on external users. So we can see which guest users have access to our site or team. And again, we can run this across multiple sites and teams. Really useful for getting an understanding of how permissions have been assigned, and really helps with that ongoing management. We trust our users to manage things, but we need to make it easier for our IT and security and compliance teams to quickly understand where there might be issues. Finally, returning to the Workspaces app, we also have our compliance policy feature. And compliance policies are a feature which runs on a scheduled basis to check certain settings. It will run against all of the sites and teams associated to one of our templates. And it can either notify administrators of a non-compliance, it can reset a non-compliance, change a setting back to what it should be, or it can report that non-compliance. And then we can access those reports in our job queue area. We can look at scheduled runs against a specific set of sites and teams, and our policies check on a number of settings. They check for disabled owners, so are there any owners of teams which have been disabled in Active Directory, which normally indicates that they've left an organization. We also check on external sharing settings, privacy, and naming conventions to see if they continue to be correctly applied against sites or teams. So for instance, a team is public when it should be private, or a site is shared with external parties when it shouldn't be. And we can drill into a report and understand what's happened. We can have a look at the history of the compliance checks and see the current state, how many sites or teams are compliant and how many are not. We can drill into the detail of that, see that these two sites are fully compliant, but we can also see that these ones were non-compliant. And we can go and look at a specific compliance check and see that we've actually got disabled owners, and also our external sharing settings do not match what we want them to be. In this case, it is shared with guests when it should be not. We can run these compliance policies against any sites and teams created in the Provision Point Workspaces app. whether that's on bulk as part of our original request, whether that's through an individual request by an end user, or if you're already struggling with sites and teams which have been created before you adopted Provision Point 365, you can import those teams into the app. We don't make changes to them, but then you can start to do things like compliance checks to help bring that situation under control. Okay, so that's our demo today. Just summarizing what we went through. So those 4 key areas in terms of where we can potentially help you maximize your move to the Microsoft cloud and continue to maximize that value. Firstly, around bulk workplace creation. So you can easily create hundreds or thousands of sites and teams as part of any migration or part of any integration scenario. You can consistently apply structures of libraries, channels, apps, planners. You can leverage PowerShell, Power Automate, or your own custom coding to use our API to then bulk create that. And that's something which we can help you do as well. We can empower that self-service to allow users to create new sites and teams and ultimately get the best out of Office 365. We can introduce those appropriate authorizations and remove the blockers around IT having to do everything. That delay of a couple of days for a new site or team to be created is not really acceptable. We can introduce a range of permissions reporting to help you get an understanding of how permissions have been assigned, where there's potential non-compliance around those permissions. And then we can help with ongoing management with our lifecycle policies attached to the lease and our new compliance policy features, which helps you understand where there's non-compliant sites and teams. It's relatively easy to do those sorts of things on one site or one team, a couple of sites, a couple of teams. But actually, when you've got hundreds of sites and teams with the situation changing on a regular basis, how do you ensure that that management is achieved without putting too many barriers in the way of your users? And with that, we'll pause and see if there's any questions today.
I've got a couple of questions for you here, Peter.
Okay.
First one is, what ongoing support is included?
Yes, okay. So support is included as part of your Provision Point license. So you get access to our support knowledge base, and you also get access to our help desk, so you can log new tickets either through our portal or via email. Also, as part of the delivery of Provision Point, we also provide onboarding services to train your team up and also help guide you through some of those important initial decisions.
Perfect. I've only got one more question for you, and it's just asking about a free trial. What kind of free trial is available?
Yes, so we do offer free trials. So anyone looking to use the app or get an understanding of what they can achieve within the app, we do offer free trials. So if you're interested in one of those, feel free to reach out and we can get someone in our customer success team to walk you through that process.
Excellent. I haven't got any more questions for you at the moment. Obviously, if our attendees have any questions they want to ask us afterwards, then they can do. Just email in, or if you have any questions at the moment, we'll be hanging around for a little while yet.
Yeah, we'll wait for another minute or so, and you'll be issued with a link to the recording. So if you've come up with a question after the demo, feel free to reach out. Okay, well, while we wait for any other further questions, just one quick slide to wrap up with. You know, what we've really talked today about is several key topics. So firstly, about preparing in the right way to start your migration if you need to do any migration activities. So leveraging Provision Point at the start not once you've created lots and sites and teams. We can help you with that creation process, put you on the right path, and actually make that process easier. Secondly, we can help you support those end users by empowering them with self-service. And finally, we can continue to give your administrators what they need and compliance managers with reports, lifecycle and compliance policies to ensure ongoing good management. I don't think we've got any more questions, but we'll stay on the meeting for another minute or so. So if anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, thank you very much.